Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm John Fortney, the Director of Communication with the Senate Republican Caucus, the Majority Caucus in the Ohio Senate. Happy Independence Day. Happy July 4th weekend, everyone. And we are joined by State Senator Terry Johnson, a veteran and a Republican from McDermott, Ohio, here on the campus of Shawnee State University. You actually spent a little time here at Shawnee State University as part of your academic career.
I did indeed. Yeah. So we got a long history with them. As a matter of fact, I was on staff here as an instructor at one point also before I went to medical school. But I thought I was going to be a lawyer and had a history degree, then decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I had to come in somewhere and get my 2 years of pre-med.
Tell me a little bit about your military service. You were in the Army?
So Army National Guard, activated to active duty status with the Army 3 times during the global war on terrorism.
And you rose to the rank of colonel.
I did, yeah.
And you put your medical background to good use.
Yeah, so the assignments I had in the Ohio Army National Guard all revolved around being a physician. I had a direct commission. There are only a couple of ways you can become an officer in the U.S. Army. One is to go West Point. The other is ROTC. Another is be enlisted and go to officer candidate school, which is a very selective, hardcore bunch of kids that go through that. In fact, our aide right now in Columbus just completed phase 1 of that process. Or you can be a doctor or a nurse and have a direct commission. So I went in the easy way.
And you spent some time, and you spent some time in helicopters too.
Yeah, so I went to flight surgeon school, and my job was to make sure that Ohio's Army aviation assets had pilots to fly. We don't really call them pilots in the Army. They're aviators, Army aviators. So I flew in all the aircraft that they had in the inventory, went up nights and flew all over the state of Ohio. And at that time, they had Hueys, the old Huey Vietnam-era Huey helicopters. And while those were in the inventory, I was qualified to fly in those as a flight surgeon. So every month I went up for 2 or 3 hours, and some of the aviators took me out, and we had a great time. I flew all over the state of Ohio at the stick of a Huey. And then when we went out of the inventory, that was over.
And when you were in Iraq serving with fellow soldiers, and you think about today and the weekend holiday of Independence Day, would you agree that members of the military have a unique understanding and certainly a solid foundational understanding of why July 4th is an important holiday?
Absolutely. And when you talk about the U.S. military, you can't speak in monolithic terms. There's some knuckleheads in the military,
They're everywhere.
They're
right?
Everywhere in society. I mean, anywhere you go. But overwhelmingly, those folks have a different perspective. And that's one of the things you see about our country today that has been influenced by those men and women. In World War II, upwards of 12% of the U.S. population served in uniform, men and women, largely men, but women as well. By the time we got to Vietnam, that percentage was down to something like 6% of Americans served in uniform. And that was at a time of an active draft. By the time you get to the global war on terrorism, less than 1% serving in uniform. Global war on terrorism to today. And so those folks that were in World War II had fantastic respect for their country and their flag. And in fact, those guys are almost all gone now, but when you'd see them at parades, they'd be in wheelchairs struggling to stand up while everybody else sat on their tails
as
when
the
flag went by. Absolutely.
Or during the national anthem.
Yeah, and so one of the most distressing things I have is when the national anthem plays and guys don't take off their hat. They slouch. They don't even turn to the flag. And women do some crazy things too. Sometimes I worry that it's not just indifference, but indignant opposition, which absolutely blows my mind because that flag means everything to people who have served under it and seen their brothers and sisters die under it. And I say sisters because in the recent wars that we've gone through, women have been exposed to direct combat. They've been flying. They've been driving trucks. They've been in areas where rockets and missiles have come in the Middle East. Those doggone IEDs that we were so fearful of. And they've been, we talk about people who were killed. So many more were maimed. And they're out there right now, bearing the scars, physical scars of combat, but even more so the psychological scars, which aren't so easily seen. And so, I see the flag, I respect it. I go to a Buckeye game and that flag goes up, buddy, I'm up, as tight and straight as I can be. And I got my Buckeye hat over my heart, and it does distress me to see others behaving otherwise.
You often wonder if you did an informal poll just out where you live, downtown at the grocery store, ask a group of kids, ask 10 kids if they know what July 4th, 1776 represents. That's what Independence Day is. And if you ask them what happened on July 4th, 1776, I wonder how many of them would say, well, that's when the Continental Congress signed the Declaration of Independence, declaring our independence from Great Britain.
Well, John, many of them will answer correctly. Many of them will not. And it's not their fault. One of the things I learned in the military was, as an officer, when something goes wrong, it's not the soldier's fault. It's the leader's fault, right? So if they're doing something wrong, it was my job to see that it didn't happen to begin with. When it did, my job to make sure that it didn't happen again. So we have let down the youth of America by not educating them about the true history of America. And people say, "Oh, that was whitewash. That was, the winners write the." Darn right, the winners write the history, and we have consistently won as Americans. And we've been on the right side of God and the right side of justice. We have brought freedom to many parts of the world that would have never had it, as well as economic prosperity, which used properly brings freedom as well.
That's right. And it's very interesting, too, to look back at history and really the genius of the Founding Fathers. And the Declaration of Independence was signed on the 4th, but the Continental Congress actually declared and passed the Declaration on the 2nd and then signed it 2 days later. And I think it's important to maybe just read a little bit, if you have never read the Declaration of Independence, to actually take time and read it and then reread it. And
actually raises the hairs on my arm.
Yeah. And here's just a couple excerpts. The one that is probably most people think of says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And at the end, it says, "We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as a free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
And they meant it.
They sure did.
They absolutely meant it. They put everything on the line. And what people don't appreciate today in America, I guess they may appreciate in other countries where they still feel the boot of a tyrant on their neck. Going up against King George was going up against the king of the world. Britain was the undisputed superpower of the world at the time. And to defy King George, just to say the words was a hanging offense. And they did it.
Yeah, they sure did. And a lot of people might also, some of the younger people out there, might think that this was the end of the war, but this was really the beginning of a very lengthy, bloody fight for independence because the British didn't surrender until 1781 at the Siege of Yorktown.
Correct. And with the help of France blockading the British Navy, there was a lot that went on. The people that were involved in this, not on the battlefield, but in the diplomatic circles and serving in the Continental Congress, and even before that, Benjamin Franklin, he was an older gentleman by the time all this happened, signing the Declaration of Independence, establishing the Constitution of the United States, deciding we're going to be a republic. He laid the groundwork for many of the things that the other folks did and got credit for way back after the French and Indian War, the Albany Congress, trying to bring people together. He was constantly instigating and scheming and trying to get the colonies to cooperate and to behave as Americans. He saw this a long way out. He was a true genius. And then you get to the folks like George Washington, who served as a militia attachment to Braddock as he marched against the French and the Indians. And, his coat shot through several times, horses shot out from under him. The Indians that they were fighting that day on the French side couldn't believe that he was still alive when he went off the field. And then that guy shows up in a uniform when they start talking about putting America together, and he just strikes a commanding figure, and everyone says, "Hey, that's George Washington," and not a brilliant man like Thomas Jefferson or John Adams or some of the others, but brilliant in his own way. A person who survived when he couldn't possibly survive, and he stood up with a sword at his side and said, "I'm with you, and I'm willing to lead you."
And he sure did. And that even continued into the Ohio Company and the founding of the first settlement of the Northwest Territory, Southeast Ohio, Washington County, Campus Martius. And over this weekend, holiday weekend, if you ever have a chance to go to the Mound Cemetery where some of the Revolutionary War soldiers are buried, it really sinks in to the sacrifice that they made during times where modern technology, that was a musket. Right. John Adams said this. He actually thought that the Torch of Freedom or Independence Day would be on July 2nd because instead of the 4th, because that's when the Continental Congress passed the Declaration. But he said this. He said, "The second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shoes and games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other from this time forward forevermore. You will think me transported with enthusiasm, but I am not. I am well aware of the toll and blood and treasure that it will cost us to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yet through all the gloom, I can see the rays of ravishing light and glory. I can see that the end is more than worth all the means, and that posterity will triumph in that day's transaction, even although we should rue it, which I trust in God we shall not." John Adams, July 3rd, 1776.
How could that be said better? Who could say it better than he did? So, Jefferson was a masterful writer, a brilliant mind, a person that read every book he could get his hands on, especially about governments and how men led one another and how societies rose and fell. But so was Adams. And so were all those other founding fathers. These were incredibly literate people that went back and forth with each other long before the Continental Congress and trying to figure out how to write a constitution. And interestingly, there's so many things today, like, Adams is talking about celebrating this, being loud, being noisy, being boisterous, being absolutely delighted to have this independence. And there are people today that, I don't think we need to have all this noise. I don't think we need to so many things America's done wrong.
Like celebrating it is something that
there's something
should
wrong.
be looked down upon.
Right.
Criticized.
And then the words that they use, Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, but people in that committee had influence over it and shaped what he wrote. Then he wrote it very eloquently in the end. And they said, yeah, that's it. And you look at Benjamin Franklin, people say, oh, he's an atheist. Well, he wasn't an atheist. He's a deist. Well, maybe. What's a deist? I don't know. But he had the absolute epiphany during the time when they were putting the document together, the Constitution, to say, you know what, everybody, all these brilliant people have all their own ideas, and all these egos are in this room, and it's really hot, and it's really miserable in here. He said, we need to turn to God. He's the one that said that. And so they fasted, they prayed, they came back in, and they resolved the issue. He knew how to get those folks to do the right thing, and he used God to do it. America is a providential country. You can say what you want about the bad things that have happened, but so many people, so many hundreds of millions of people have benefited from the freedom that's happened here in America. And so many more hundreds of millions of people around the world have benefited from the founding of America that you cannot say America is a bad place. You cannot say America should never have been. And the people that protest about America, why, these 13 things are wrong. These 14 things are wrong. You wouldn't even be here to say that if things hadn't worked out the way they did.
Or you wouldn't be saying that in some of the other countries where we've fought for freedom as well today.
Yeah, if you were a theoretical citizen somewhere else. In France, we give France a hard time.
Oh, we do.
But I tell you what, the French people that were alive during D-Day, they welcomed our soldiers back with open arms. They knew the sacrifice that our young people made. When you look down on the beaches of D-Day, and there's one classic picture taken from an airplane, and you can see the landing craft floating in the water there, and this red pool coming out from the beach, American blood in the water, so visible from like 1,000 feet above. Those soldiers walked into machine guns, walked into the teeth of Hitler's 1,000-year Reich, and set things right. America has liberated more people than any other country in the history of the world. America has given prosperity to more people than any other country in the history of the world. If you look at what we have today, if we wanted to be a bad guy like Putin or Xi Jinping or the knucklehead in North Korea, I lose track of who they even are, right? If we wanted to do that, we could do it. We could absolutely make everybody else miserable. But instead, we try to lift everyone up. We have a U.S. Navy that keeps the sea lanes free for commerce. What does China want to do now? They want to claim the South China Sea. They want to build these fake islands and say, hey, this is our territory, and therefore we own all this stuff out here. They want to shut down commerce and dominate it. We want to keep it free for the world.
Getting back to also what you were saying, much of what I just read, whether it was the excerpts from the Declaration of Independence or the quote from John Adams, they talk a lot about God. And today it seems like God and freedom, people want to criticize it. But the founding fathers were not against religion and government. They believed about religion and government. What they were against was a government religion.
Right. That's absolutely right. They wanted this to be a free country where people could worship freely without, backlash from the government. That very simply. And they believed that America was providential. They didn't have to even write it down. It was just common knowledge there was a God. And today, here's Terry Johnson speaking, just from my heart. Mock God at your own peril. And it's just everywhere. You turn on TV and you look at what's on TV, and it's satanic. All the streaming stuff we see. It's witchcraft, it's sorcery, it's everything that is an abomination to God himself.
Or on social media, how vile people can be. And you see, I think that's also one reason why the state of Ohio has tried to take a stand, at least from the administration, and John Husted, Lieutenant Governor, trying to take the lead on, hey, parents, we need to be making sure that we're sending the right message to a lot of these companies, because what's TikTok? Well, TikTok is owned by the Communist Chinese. And this is all about data mining and knowing everything that what you purchase and what you say, and it is quite disturbing. Something that you have really fought for is protecting Ohio's farmland and Ohio's military installations from our foreign adversaries. As part of the operating budget, you were able to protect Ohio's farmland. Now, what did that legislation actually do?
Yeah, so it did just that. In the operating budget, which is everything we do in the legislature, including putting forth items in the budget, is subject to signature of the governor before it's finalized. That our founders, in their brilliance, set up a system of government this way. Checks and balances. The legislative branch by itself is divided in two. We were independent. And then we have the check of the governor. Well, the governor vetoed part of this. Hey, he's the governor. He can do that.
And what part was that? The military installation part?
It was. And when I talk to rank and file folks, you just go out and you talk to someone you meet, and and somehow they know about this. They ask you about it. And you say, yeah, we were able to keep foreign adversaries, and particularly China, because they're the ones buying up everything right now.
Doesn't have to be a country. It can be any organization seen as a foreign adversary.
Yeah, especially if they're tied to one of these countries, right? And so I say, so in Ohio now, those folks can no longer buy up farmland. And they said, well, good. Well, what part was vetoed? Believe it or not, military installations, and they are flabbergasted.
For unforeseen economic consequences, I think is what the language was.
And when I explain that to them, their jaw just drops. Why in the world would we be concerned about that if these people want to do us in? And there's a working man standing before me, and let's say he's 40 years old and he's got kids. Well, that's a threat to his kids.
Sure it is.
What's our job? It's always a failure of leadership. It's not his fault that we're not protecting his kids from communist China and Iran and Russia. It's our fault. So if someone that says something like, there could be unforeseen economic consequences, they're wrong. That guy knows it.
The unforeseen consequences could be espionage on somebody maybe flying, I don't know, 2 or 3 drones next to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, or to
the threats are so real,
right? Or over in Rickenbacker and in Columbus.
So right there in Columbus, we have 2 gigantic bases in Ohio. One is the old SAC base, the Strategic Air Command, where you used to fly B-52s out 2 at a time. Those SAC exercises. So it's still there. Now we got a Army aviation unit sitting there. I used to serve there, and right next door to us, our neighbors, our Air National Guard, with an active duty mission, KC-135 tankers. So let's just say that routinely these planes take off, and military training is very routine. Let's say one day something's a little bit different. The plane takes off by itself, or 2 take off simultaneously. Well, that's going to alert an enemy that maybe that plane that took off out of Whiteman Air Force Base out west, headed to goodness knows where, is going to need to be refueled. So those planes, each one of those planes is a strategic national asset, and they need to be protected. There are Americans sitting in the cockpit of these airplanes, and these planes were built in the mid-1950s to the mid-1960s. They're flying essentially a piece of junk, putting their skin between them and us, and we're worried about unforeseen economic consequences. And if we lose a B-1 bomber or a B-2 bomber, we're talking, hundreds of millions or $1 billion in national treasure. So it really riles me up to think that we didn't sign that.
And you're in the last session here at the end of June, your bill, Senate Bill 226, was passed, I think as part of a different bill, or was it passed as a standalone bill? Standalone bill prohibiting the purchase of property near military bases. So
so what we did, when that was vetoed, we came back with the standalone piece of legislation to put back what was vetoed, and I expanded it a bit. So in the original amendment to the budget, which became law, thank goodness, I'm glad the governor moved forward with that one. So now we have within 25 miles of a military installation. Okay, so Wright-Patterson, one of the most secretive and important bases in all of America, over there at Rickenbacker, and other military installations that we have, like DCSC, Defense or whatever.
DSCC.
DSCC. I'm
right.
sorry. Yeah, I should know that.
They supply a lot of.
I used to be there.
Yeah,
so
right.
I had a
so
badge
many acronyms and abbreviations.
So those places are very important, but I also added critical infrastructure. So they also can't buy near the Greenup Dam. They also can't buy near the nuclear power plant or a coal-fired power plant.
It was also interesting. You think back to 9/11. Even here in Southern Ohio, when I was still working in the news business, there were reports and law enforcement reports of suspicious activity and people pulled off the side of the road taking photos of power plants and other critical infrastructure.
Absolutely. And all over the country, the FBI has been tracking different types of probing attacks and things that bad people have done. Foreign adversaries, who knows who they are, but they've shot up power plants, and then stood back to see what happens, or transformers, things like that. But getting to the heart of this could have been done in the budget. Now we're all the way until almost the lame duck session, which we're going to come back to, and it's just through one house. So this has to go to the other house and be considered. We got a very short field to get it done, or it has to wait all the way until the new year for me to stand it up again and run it again. And in the meantime, national security, Ohio State security is compromised because we were worried about possible unforeseen economic consequences.
As we talk about security during the July 4th holiday, recently the state of Ohio, the General Assembly, did two things. One thing they did was relax the deadline for the Democratic National Committee to put Joe Biden on the ballot. The second thing that was done was the General Assembly, during a special session that was called for by the governor because the House just walked away from the issue altogether. But finally, a bill prohibiting, outlawing foreign contributions directed at campaigns targeting the Ohio Constitution were finally outlawed. Already, as a candidate, you may not, Senator Johnson, accept contributions from foreign donors, correct? Right. So all we did was say, okay, we're going to apply the same law to issue campaigns that target the Ohio Constitution. Now, the left, the progressive left, and its members in the legislature had an absolute fit-throwing meltdown over it's not happening. This doesn't happen. There's no reason for this. Well,
so what are they worried about?
Apparently, it had been happening. Right. What were they worried about? Because this past week, Mark Elias, who is Barack Obama's attorney, along with Eric Holder's attorney that has been fighting on this whole redistricting issue, filed a lawsuit challenging that bill or that law in Ohio that the governor has signed as unconstitutional. So that just tells me that they are using and relying on foreign funds to run many of these ballot campaigns that are targeting the Ohio Constitution, our state's founding document. How disturbing should that be to Ohio voters and to Ohioans in general that there is foreign influence that wants to change your state's founding document and your way of life, quite frankly?
Yeah. Believe it or not, there are people out there that would like to see us dead and gone. How can they do it? They haven't been able to do it militarily. So they go back to what Lincoln feared. No foreign adversary could slake their thirst from the mighty Ohio. They couldn't do it. But by gosh, if we come apart within, it could happen. And so they use some useful idiots to work against us. So it's fine to disagree. It's fine to have other opinions. But when you, again, talking about that 40-year-old man and his kids, and he's out there working every day, trying to have a better future for them in the face of an economic catastrophe that's happened to us in the last 3 years at the hands of progressive liberals in charge of the bank, right? So here he is trying to figure this, and he can't even guarantee the safety of his kids while he's out working. You don't undermine the country to achieve your ideology. If you do, that is not a good American attitude.
One of the quotes that I was offered a response. Often the media will call and say, "Hey, could we get a quote or a response about the foreign funds lawsuit against the bill that outlawed foreign funds?" And I said, "Sure." And here's what I had to say about that. I said, following months of Ohio Democrats denying that foreign funds are a part of ballot campaigns, Barack Obama's lawyer files a lawsuit to protect their foreign contributors, millions of dollars in foreign dark money, and foreign election interference. Ohio's Constitution isn't for sale, despite the progressive left's un-American sellout to foreign influence. This clearly demonstrates their effort to transform Ohio into the radical D.C. vision by using unlimited contributions from outside the United States. We've talked about the 1630 fund, $220 million that was coming from a Swiss billionaire to set up this fund. And this money goes to these very types of campaigns, targeting, quite frankly, our way of life. And I've even gone as far now to calling it, if you support using foreign donations and issue campaigns targeting the Ohio Constitution, you're a traitor. I'm sorry.
That's it.
I'll get some hate mail.
No, I agree.
But that's that's un-American.
Send it. And particularly the folks that are on social media that have some sort of little icon and some clever little name that they make up. You're anonymous. You're a coward. Right. You're absolutely a coward, and I have no respect for you whatsoever until you come out in the cold, hard light of day, look that 40-year-old man and his kids in the eye, and say what your opinion really is. You do that, and I'll have some respect for you. I will disagree with you vehemently. I will work tooth and nail against you. I've got grandkids. They're going to be great grandkids. And I respect everybody out there in America, that is happy to be an American, will stand up for the flag on the 4th of July, hang it out from that's something else. When you come down here into Southern Ohio, as opposed to maybe some of the nicer neighborhoods you might see up around Columbus or Cleveland, with mansions or, people that have all the manicured look-alike neighborhoods with HOAs. Down here, you see people in very humble abodes flying a flag.
And fly that flag.
I can go down a road out here on my way home. I turn down into a hollow, and I can count 13 or 14 flags on my way to my house.
Right. It's interesting you think about right after 9/11, how there was a flag almost on every home.
Yep.
It'd be nice to be able to bring that type of feeling back, that there's nothing to be ashamed of, that you fly the American flag and you have a spotlight on it at all times at night.
You got it. And I challenge the folks on the left, the liberals, the people that hate America as it is, and they want it to change. If you love your country, put your flag up. All the people that have died so that you can have your liberal, progressive opinion, you owe it to them to at least respect the flag that they bled under.
That's right. State Senator Terry Johnson, always a great conversation, insightful as always. Thank you for your service. Happy Independence Day. Happy July 4th.
Happy Independence Day.
Thanks for your time. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.